Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are from Group 2. We would like to present about psychomotor assessment. Okay, let me introduce the group members of this presentation today. There are Mr. Nur Rahman, Miss Ainur Rasida, Miss Wuning Nur Habibah, Miss Lulu Atul Musyafa'ah, and Mr. Inuhanindra. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the outline of the presentation today are general introduction that will be delivered by Miss Ainurasida, listening skill that will be explained by Miss Wening, and speaking skill of psychomotor assessment that will be delivered by Mr. Nurrahman. After that, reading skill of psychomotor assessment that will be introduced by Miss Lulu Atul, and the last one, writing skill of psychomotor assessment that will be explained by Mr. Inuhanendra. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce about the brief history of psychomotor domain. Long time ago, there was Dr. Benjamin S. Bloom who proposed Bloom's taxonomy in 1956 as a design and evaluation toolkit for academic education. There are three domains in Bloom's taxonomy. Cognitive domain, it assesses students' knowledge. Affective domain, it measures students' attitude. And psychomotor domain, it examines students' skill. And what's the correlation between taxonomy, domain, and psychomotor skill? A taxonomy is a kind of structure or plan to assist educators achieving each development stage or learner's growth. It is important that each stage is mastered before moving to the next stage. And domain is a category from taxonomy. So in taxonomy, there are several domains. And psychomotor skill is a kind of physical skill that covers an ability to move, act, or manually manipulate the body to perform a physical movement. So psychomotor skill is kind of physical skill. It belongs to the psychomotor domain that emphasizes on the physical movement. And psychomotor assessment is a kind of assessment which assesses students' physical skill using particular instruction and rubric. Ladies and gentlemen, psychomotor assessment uh, comes from an assessment of psychomotor skill, which highlights on the physical skill of students by using a particular instruction. Okay, so what's a psychomotor behavior? Psychomotor behavior is a kind of behavior that emphasizes on the physical movement, and it covers speeded equipment to perform the psychomotor skill. And the testing of this skill is more than just paper-based assessment and pencil, such as in other domains. And the skill is needed to be assessed in order to examine the mastery of the skill. Okay, there are some examples of psychomotor assessment, such as how to ride a bike, wrapping a present, and changing a diaper. Those examples belongs to psychomotor assessment. And meanwhile, the types of bikes, types of wrapping paper, and why babies wet their diapers belongs to cognitive assessment because it assesses students' knowledge about something. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, besides Bloom, there are some learning theories that explain this domain, such as Dave, Simpson, Harrow, and Romisowski. Dave's psychomotor domain is the simplest and easiest domain to apply in corporate environment. The others are employed for particular adult training. So in here, we focus on Dave's psychomotor stages in 7th grade of junior high school level. Okay, in here we can see that there are some stages such as imitation, manipulation, precision, articulation, and naturalization. In imitation, we can see the behavior, copy action of another. For example, watch the teacher and repeat the action of the teacher, and then the action verb that's usually implied are copy, follow, replicate, repeat, and etc. And for the manipulation, it reproduces an activity from the instructor and then uh, carry out the task from written or verbal instruction, for example. And the action verbs are recreate, perform, and implement, etc. And the precision, it executes skill reliable and independent of help, such as perform a task or activity with expertise and to high quality without assistance or instruction. For example, demonstrate, complete, show, and etc. And then articulation adapts and integrate expertise to satisfy. For example, relate and combine associated activities. For example, the instruction is construct, combine, and etc. Naturalization, the behavior is automated unconscious mastery of activity and related skills at the strategic level. And then, for example, of the activities, define aim, approach, and etc. And then the instruction is design or specify or manage and etc. So for the next presenters, they will deliver an implementation of psychomotor assessment on 4 English language skills by using the psychomotor stages. For the next presenter, Mr. Waning, the time is yours.
Alright, thank you for the opportunity. Here I would like to explain the listening assessment of psychometric domain. In this case, our group chose the junior high school level. Especially in listening skill, I gave an example of material for 8th grader. The song material in 8th grade is on basic competence 3.11 and 4.11. As we only focus on the psychometric domain, let's take a look at the basic competence 4.11. Here you can read by yourself. I formulated 2 indicators here. The first one is menyimak dan melengkapi lirik lagu yang rumpang, and the second one is meniru dengan menyanyikan lirik lagu yang diputar. Those 2 indicators is appropriate to the skill being assessed. For 8th grade students, this level of psychomotor domain is at the lower level. It is imitation level. In this level, students only imitate what the teacher do. The keywords in immediate level are menyalin, meniru, mengikuti, mereplikasi, mengulangi, and etc. Okay, let me show you the example of kisi-kisi. This is the example of kisi-kisi soal for 8th grade students focusing in psychomotor listening. Oh, I'm sorry, I got my typo there. It should be basic competence 4.11. Okay, here I give a material about Michael Jackson's song titled Heal the World. The first indicator shows that students do an activity of completing the missing lyrics. Here we integrate listening into writing because it is closely related in an activity. So the skill being assessed in the process is listening, but we can see the result on the form is written. The second indicator shows that students do activity to follow and then imitate the lyrics. In this part, we integrate listening into speaking skill. We assess the students' listening comprehension through their speaking. The spoken activity will be done by the students in this case. The next is the student's worksheet or the student's practice. The first instruction is listen to the song carefully and complete the missing parts by using the correct words. Well, I chose a kind of cloze test in this practice. Cloze test is a listening activity to complete a text where the test taker should complete the missing words. The test maker gives a space or missing word for every 6 or 7 words. For junior high school level, it will be better if the teacher gives chance to students to listen the audio or the song twice. Firstly, they have to catch the song meaning, and secondly, they can fill in the missing parts. In instruction number 2, the teacher asks the students to sing by following the song. It is optional. The teacher may ask students to sing along the audio or after the audio is stopped. The teacher may assess the students listening through their speaking. And then the last is for the rubric. For the students' performance, the teacher may follow this score rubric. Number 1, show the first indicator. It is listening and completing the missing lyrics. If the student write correct words, so all the words are correct, she or he may get 45 for the maximum. While for the students who are still meet difficulties in completing the lyrics, yeah, they can get 40 scores, 40. And then if the students really got some difficulties there and there are some misspellings, so she or he may get 35. And then the next is the rubric number 2. I focused on the speaking product as the result, but the skill assessed is listening. If the words are completely pronounced based on the lyric, students may get 45. If there is still mispronouncing, they may get 40. But if the students still did many mispronouncing, they may get 35. Then the scores are summed and the final score is the student score. The maximum score is 90 and the minimum score is 70. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, our beloved Professor Dr. Anggani Linggarbarati MPD. Also, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow classmates of assessment in ELD. I am Nur Rahman as the third speaker, and for the next session of our presentation today, we will discuss the notion of assessing speaking skill. The discussion will include the explanation for assessing speaking, and its implementation in the level of junior high school for the 7th graders, including the construction of the test items, guidance or the table of specification, and also the example of scoring rubrics. Let's start by discussing the notion of assessing speaking based on the theory proposed by H. Douglas Brown in 2004. According to Brown, from a pragmatic view of language performance, listening and speaking are almost always closely interrelated. While it is possible to isolate some listening performance types, it is very difficult to isolate oral production tasks that do not directly involve the interaction of oral comprehension or the listening skill. Only in limited contexts of speaking, such as monologues, speeches, or telling a story and reading aloud, can we assess oral language without the oral participation of an interlocutor. On this note, we can continue by discussing the main challenges in assessing speaking skill. While speaking is a productive skill that can be directly and empirically observed, those observations are invariably colored by the accuracy and effectiveness of a test taker's listening skill, which necessarily compromises the reliability and validity of an oral production test. How do you know for certain that a speaking score is exclusively a measure of oral production without the potentially frequent clarification of an interlocutor? This interaction of speaking and listening challenges the designer of an oral production test to tease apart as much as possible the factors accounted for by oral intake. Another challenge is the design of elicitation techniques. Because mass speaking is the product of creative construction of linguistic strings, the speaker makes choices of lexicon, structure, and discourse. If your goal is to have test takers demonstrate certain spoken grammatical categories, for example, the stimulus you design must elicit those grammatical categories in ways that prohibit the test taker from avoiding or paraphrasing and thereby dodging the production of the target form. Next, we will discuss some basic types of speaking. A kind of taxonomy can be constructed based on the differences of the speaking performance assessment tasks. The following are the categories for oral production. First is imitative. At one end of a continuum of types of speaking performance is the ability to simply parrot back or imitate a word or phrase or possibly a sentence. While this is a purely phonetic level of oral production, a number of prosodic, lexical, and grammatical properties of language may be included in the criterion performance. We are interested only in what is traditionally labeled as pronunciation. No inferences are made about the test taker's ability to understand or convey meaning or to participate in an interactive conversation. The second type of speaking is the intensive. A second type of speaking frequently employed in assessment context is the production of short stretches of oral language designed to, to demonstrate competence in a narrow band of grammatical, phrasal, lexical, or phonological relationships. Examples of intensive assessment tasks include directed response tasks, reading aloud, sentence, and dialogue completion, and limited picture cued tasks, including simple sequences. Next is the responsive types of speaking. Responsive assessment tasks include interaction and text comprehension, but at somewhat limited level of a very short conversations, standard greetings and small talk, simple requests and comments, and etc. The stimulus is almost always a spoken prompt in order to preserve authenticity, with perhaps only one or two follow-up questions or retorts. The next type is the interactive one. The difference between responsive and interactive speaking is in the length and complexity of the interaction, which sometimes includes multiple exchanges and or multiple participants. Interactions can take the two forms of transactional language, which has the purpose of exchanging specific information, or interpersonal exchanges, which have the purpose of maintaining social relationships. In interpersonal exchanges, oral production can become pragmatically complex with the need to speak in a casual register and use colloquial language, ellipses, slang, humor, and other sociolinguistic conventions. And the last type of basic types of speaking is the extensive one. Extensive oral production tasks include speeches, oral presentations, and storytelling, during which the opportunity for oral interaction from listeners is either highly limited, perhaps to nonverbal responses, or ruled out altogether. Language style is frequently more deliberative, and planning is involved than the format for extensive tasks. But we cannot rule out certain informal monologues, such as casually delivered speech, for example, a recount storytelling like my vacation in the mountains, and then personal story about a recipe for outstanding rendang, for example, and recounting the plot of a novel or movie. Next, we are going to briefly discuss the micro and macro skills of speaking. A list of speaking micro and macro skills enumerated the various components of speaking that make up criteria for assessment. This list serves as a taxonomy of skills from which you will select one or several that will become the objective or objectives of the assessment task. The micro skills of speaking refer to producing the smaller chunks of language, such as phonemes, morphemes, words, collocations, and phrasal units. And meanwhile, the macro skills imply the speaker's focus on the larger elements such as fluency, discourse, function, style, cohesion, nonverbal communication, and strategic options. The micro and macro skills total roughly 16 different objectives to assess in speaking. And we move to the important considerations in assessing speaking. As already noted in the introduction to this section, consider three important issues as you set out to design the task of speaking. First one is no speaking task is capable of isolating the single skill of oral production. Concurrent involvement of the additional performance of oral comprehension or listening and possibly reading is usually necessary. And for the second consideration is that eliciting the specific criterion you have designated for a task can be tricky because beyond the word level, spoken language offers a number of productive options to the test takers. Make sure your elicitation prompt archives its aims as closely as possible. And the last one is the cause that the previous two characteristics of oral protection assessment infer. It is important to carefully specify scoring procedures for a response so that ultimately you achieve as high a reliability index as possible. And next, we will discuss the implementation of speaking assessment. In the level of junior high school for the 7th graders, including the construction of the test items, guidance of the tables of or the table of specification, and also the example of scoring rubrics. This particular example of speaking assessment is also constructed based on the current situation in which the teaching and learning process are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Hence, the speaking test will be carried out online and in the form of recordings. The followings are the example of speaking assessment for the students in the grade 7 of junior high school based on the syllabus. The basic competence being assessed is the 4.5, which is about the written oral text that contains information or short dialogue to state or ask the behavior, action, and function of people, animals, or objects in the surroundings area that modeled and performed by the teacher. There are four main indicators for this particular basic competence, and all of them will be implemented in the examples of assessing speaking based on the basic types of speaking, which already been explained, and also the psychomotoric taxonomy presented by the first speaker. Next, let's take a look at the table of specification or the kisi-kisi for the assessment. The following is the table of specification for the intended speaking assessment. It contains the information of the test items, basic competence, the indicators being assessed, and the level of the psychomotor as well as the test items number. The explanation for this information will be presented along with the explanation of the instruction in the test items in the next session. The following speaking assessment is carried out after the teacher finished the explanation on the materials of Basic Competence 4.5, along with the text examples and the explanation on the language features, and also the aspect of communicative approach in which a dialogue must be structured with an opening, negotiating, and closing sections, like in the following examples. In the instruction for the speaking test, the teacher will provide such dialogue as the basis of the students in doing the test. The teacher first record the above the current dialogue, and the video will also show the text in full to serve as the example for students. Then the teacher also provides the instructions for each items in the recordings. For the first instruction, students are asked to imitate and record individually the pronunciation of some vocabularies provided by the teacher. The item number 1 will be assessed only in terms of students' pronunciation accuracy. This item can be categorized as the imitative type of speaking and belongs to the imitation stage for the level of psychomotor. And for the next item, for the second instruction, students are asked to imitate and record, still individually, the pronunciation of some sentences provided by the teacher. The sentences will be in the form of statement and yes or no or WH questions. The item number 2 will be assessed in terms of the student's intonation in pronouncing the sentences, such as the falling intonation for the WH question and the rising intonation for the yes or no question. This item can also be categorized as the imitative type of speaking and belongs to the imitation stage for the level of psychomotor. And then for the next items, for the third instruction, students are asked to read aloud the dialogue provided by the teacher with their partners in turns and record it. The text and the example on how to read the dialogues already presented by the teacher in the beginning of this speaking test instruction. The test number 3 will be assessed in terms of the student's pronunciation, intonation, and fluency. This item is similar to the items number 1 and 2 in terms of speaking type and psychomotor level. And for the fourth and the last instruction, students are asked to create, perform, and record their own dialogue with their partners. Their dialogue must consist of the opening, negotiating, and closing parts based on the provided example. In relation to this assessing of the speaking skill, the item number 4 will also be assessed in terms of the student pronunciation, intonation, and fluency. And in terms of the structure, teacher can assess the student's dialogue based on the aspect of writing skill, which will be presented later on. This item can be categorized as the interactive type of speaking and belongs to precision stage for the level of psychomotor. Next, we will discuss about the scoring rubrics for the speaking assessment. The aspects being assessed in the previous example of speaking test are highly emphasized on the pronunciation accuracy, intonation, and fluency. Thus, the scoring rubric can be constructed as the following. The test item number 1 is scored based on the pronunciation of each 10 words. And the categories are already presented and also the scoring system. Next is the rubric for item number 2. The test item number 2 is scored based on the pronunciation and intonation of each 4 sentences. Since the teacher only provided 4 examples to be imitated, the categories are presented for each of the aspects versus pronunciation and intonation, and the scoring system is also available. And for the last scoring rubric is for the item number 3 and 4. These 2 items are scored based on the pronunciation, intonation, and fluency of each 12 lines in the dialogue, since the example of the dialogue that has to be imitated by students are divided into 12 lines. And for the total scores for all of the test items in the speaking test will result in 100 if the students have the perfect execution. Okay, I think that's all from me. Thousand pardon if there is any mistakes or inconvenience in this section of assessing speaking skill. And for the next section on assessing reading skill will be presented by Miss Lulu Atul Musyafa. Thank you.
Reading skill assessment in psychomotor domain. Well, we already choose the junior high school level. Again, what we need to consider before creating reading skill assessment is the basic competence. As mentioned in the previous group, that cognitive assessment focusing on 3 points, it can be 3.1, 3.2 for the exact number, while psychomotor here are focusing on 4 points. It covers 4.1, 4.2 and so on. Then we design the kisi-kisi soal. The components are the basic competence, materials, indicators, number of questions, and form of the questions. Referring to that theory that has been explained from the first speaker, that assessing psychomotor domains consists of imitation, manipulation, precision, articulation, and naturalization. So, in designing the reading question skill, in the first stage is imitations. The form of the question can be repeated after the teacher. The teacher might ask students to repeat the passage. The point is to be able to repeat the correct pronunciation given by the teacher. For the next one is the manipulation. The form of the question can be, please read the following passage. The teacher asks students to read the passage. It can be the whole passage or one sentence for every student to manage the time efficiently. In this stage, the point is the students read the passage by themselves. The teacher didn't give the example before. The next one is precision. Here the students are demanded to create a product. In reading skill assessment, the teacher can ask students to search articles from other sources related to the topic discussed. If the students can find the article, means that they have good ability in reading comprehension, vice versa. If the students couldn't find any article related with the topic discussed, means that the students lack ability in reading comprehension. The next one is articulations. The form of the articulation, please read the passage carefully. Here I give the additional adverb carefully, means that the articulation, the teacher gives the information to the students that next meeting there will be assessment for the reading skills, and inform that they will be assessed in pronunciation, stressing, and intonation, so the students have enough time to prepare their performance. In this stage, the point is the teacher should assess at least 3 components of reading comprehension skill. It can be from pronunciation, stressing, articulation, or other components related with reading comprehension skill. And for the last one is naturalization. It's about neutral or reflex assessment, so the teacher didn't give any information before. Here the teacher suddenly asked the students to read the passage and assess their performance directly. Here is the example of the rubric of reading assessment skills. The components can be named for their identity and in general, time for reading, comprehension, pronunciation. You might add any components related with reading comprehension skill assessment. And here is the descriptions of the rubric. You may give the students score from 0 until 3 from depend on its description given and the student's performance. Thank you.
Hello guys, my name is Inuhanendra. Please let me continue the presentation about writing skill. So there are many kinds of tests and numbers of factors that can be evaluated in writing skill. According to Madsen, he explains that the factors evaluated in tests of writing cover spelling, punctuation, vocabulary, grammar, diction, appropriate content, rhetorical matters like organization, cohesion, unity, or appropriateness to the audience, like topic and occasion, as well as sophisticated concerns such as logics and style. As writing is an integrated process like reading, it is necessary for teachers to make differences between the early stage students from those of the more advanced in its process of teaching as well, as in its selected materials of tests. In the early stage of learning, written exercises will usually be used simply to strengthen the learning of specific grammatical points or lexical items. Now, however, what we discuss here is the psychomotor domain, which is about psychomotor skill and psychomotor assessment. So, what is psychomotor skill? It is a kind of physical skills that cover an ability to move, act, or manually manipulate the body to perform a physical movement, whereas psychomotor assessment is a kind of assessment which assesses students' physical skill using particular instruction and rubric. So I would only like to take the basic competence of 4.7, basic competence number 4.7, especially the second one, which is menyusun teks deskriptif lisan dan tulis, sangat pendek dan sederhana terkait orang, binatang, dan benda dengan memperhatikan fungsi sosial, struktur teks, dan unsur kebahasaan secara benar dan sesuai konteks. And then let's go to the kisi-kisi. It contains kompetensi dasar, materi, indikator soal, nama soal, dan penduk soal. So of course the basic competence is menyusun teks deskriptif, especially the written one, sangat pendek dan sederhana terkait orang, binatang, dan benda dengan memperhatikan fungsi sosial, struktur teks, dan unsur kebahasaan secara benar dan sesuai konteks. In this the material is about descriptive text, so it has already included the present tense, the simple present tense, and the indicator are membuat kalimat sederhana dan mendeskripsikan gambar. So this is the examples of the writing skill practice. The students are asked to match the words in a box A with the words in box B to make a noun phrase. After that, they have to use the noun phrase to make sentences. For example, they have to choose the first word first, which is, for example, wild. So what is the best or the suitable word for wild? It can be wild tiger, and then for hot it can be hot coffee, deep river, rainy day, and colorful birds. And then they have to make sentences. And then the second example is this one. I asked the student to describe each picture. It means that there are two pictures in 5 sentences. We can also ask them to describe more than 5 sentences. For example, they have to make a descriptive text contains of 10 sentences or maybe 15 sentences. Now this specific characteristic of exercise is it's like an essay test items, which is it has a freedom of response, and students are given questions and instructions which require them to answer or produce their own ideas. The result of each student may vary, and then they are relatively free to decide how to answer the questions. And then this is it, the rubric. It contains isi dan organisasi gagasan. This is the first two, and then there's the last one, the next slide. As you can see here, we can We can give the scoring based on this rubric. For the first one, from the easy, ada topik jelas, cerita menarik dan orisinal, ditopang bukti dan fakta-fakta lengkap, terperinci, dan seterusnya. Kemudian untuk organisasi gagasan, itu ada gagasan dibatasi dalam unit-unit paragraf, disampaikan dengan pola urutan waktu dan tepat. And then the last one is the bahasa. As you can see there, paragraph cohesive dan coherent, kalimat efektif dan komunikatif, struktur kalimat baku, diisi tepat dan variatif, makna tidak ambigu, penerapan konjugasi secara tepat, and so on. So I think that's all from the writing skill. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we come up with the conclusion part of this presentation today. After getting a detailed explanation about an implementation of psychomotor assessment in each language skill, we can infer that in assessing psychomotor assessment, some English language skills can be integrated one another, such as speaking skill integrates with listening skill and reading skill. Besides, listening skill also integrates with speaking skill and writing skill. Based on the examples above, both speaking skill and listening skill cannot stand independently because in assessing students' performance, sometimes another skill is required to complete the assessment of the main skill. Therefore, the test taker should pay attention on emphasizing what aspect of the main skill that will be assessed in order to avoid an overlapping towards another language skill. Ladies and gentlemen, regardless of which domain that one chooses to follow, there are 3 basic levels or steps in the overall instructional process involve imitation, practice, and habit. In the first step, imitation, in this level, the instructor shares the knowledge content and demonstrates the skill. This level happens when the instructor shares the essential information about the skill, such as fact, background information, safety consideration, and etc. Then the instructor breaks the skill into small steps, demonstrates the skill, and allows the learner imitate them. And the second one is practice. At this level, the student is allowed to practice alone and or with the instructor to practice skill over and over, with feedback from the instructor until mastering the basic skill. And the student is able to ask questions, receive feedback, and attempt in a friendly, safe environment. And the last one is habit. The last level happens when the students develop such proficiency, or they can overcome a particular skill by practicing it persistently, so they can develop particular proficiency and create their own version. After that, they teach that skill to another. Ladies and gentlemen, students who begin to learn new skill, they mostly have low basic knowledge about it, right? They have to do an action progressively first to develop their abilities, to get higher level, and then to comprehend their performance. I mean to overwhelm their performance. And psychomotor domain originally related to physical movement. However, today it also relates to communication, such as telephone skill, public speaking, and also computer operations such as data entry and keyboard skills. Okay, here are the references of the presentation today. Thank you for hearing so attentively and your attention today. Hopefully, this presentation is beneficial for us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.